Story 1. I never thought I'd be the one calling the police at my son's birthday party, but here we are. Let me back up and explain how this whole mess started. My little boy just turned 3. He's the light of my life, curious, kind, and always smiling. My husband and I aren't wealthy by any means, but we wanted to make his birthday special. We've been saving for months to throw him a nice party with a decent cake, some decorations, and a few special gifts that we knew he'd love. We live in a modest neighborhood where most families are in similar financial situations. We're all hard workers just trying to provide the best we can for our kids. I've made friends with several parents at the local playground, and we've created a nice little community. One of these playground acquaintances has a son about my boy's age. We aren't particularly close, but our kids played together occasionally, so I felt obligated to invite them to the party. In retrospect, that was my first mistake. The morning of the party arrived, and I was running around like a madwoman trying to get everything ready. My husband had hung streamers and balloons around our living room and backyard. Nothing fancy, but colorful and festive. The cake was homemade chocolate with buttercream frosting and decorated with little toy cars, which my son is obsessed with. We had set up a small table for gifts and another for snacks and drinks. It wasn't Pinterest-worthy, but it was made with love. The guests started arriving around noon. Most brought modest gifts wrapped in bright paper, and the kids immediately began playing in the backyard while the adults chatted. Everything was going smoothly until she arrived, about 30 minutes late. I'll never forget the look on her face when she walked in. She scanned the room with this pinched expression like she'd smelled something foul. Her son trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable. I noticed right away that she was dressed like she was attending a cocktail party rather than a kid's birthday. Designer sunglasses, fancy purse, the works. Me. Hi there, thanks for coming. The kids are playing in the backyard if your son wants to join them. She barely acknowledged me with a nod before handing over a small gift bag. I added it to the gift table and offered her a drink, which she accepted with a grimace. For the first 20 minutes, she stood apart from the other parents, scrolling through her phone. I tried to include her in conversations, but she answered in one-word responses. I figured she was just shy and left her to herself. Then came cake time. All the kids gathered around the table, singing and excited. My boy's eyes were wide with delight as we brought out the cake with 3 lit candles. That's when she decided to speak up. Is that cake gluten-free? Me? No, it's just a regular chocolate cake. I didn't know anyone had dietary restrictions. Does your son have an allergy? No, but I prefer him to eat gluten-free. I can't believe you didn't consider children with special diets. I was taken aback, but tried to recover quickly. Me. I'm sorry about that. We do have some fruit and other snacks if he'd prefer those instead. Fine. I guess he'll just have to watch the other children enjoy themselves. The weird thing was, while she was complaining, her son was eyeing the cake eagerly like any normal kid would. When we served the pieces, he happily took one before she could stop him. But the cake incident was just the beginning. As we moved to the living room for gift opening, she began loudly commenting on our decorations. For a child's party, I would have expected a bit more effort. When I threw my son's last birthday, we had a professional decorator. These streamers look like they're from the dollar store. They were from the dollar store, and I felt my cheeks burning. Another parent quickly jumped in. Other parent, I think everything looks lovely. The kids are having a great time, and that's what matters. I shot the other parent a grateful look and tried to focus on my excited 3-year-old, who was ready to open his presents. The kids all gathered around as my son started tearing into the wrapping paper with the unrestrained joy that only toddlers can muster. The first few gifts were small toys and books, which he greeted with enthusiasm. He had just opened a colorful picture book when she chimed in again. Shouldn't you be teaching your son to share his new gifts? All these children should get a turn. My husband, who had been remarkably patient until then, finally spoke up. My husband, it's his birthday. The gifts are for him. The other kids will get gifts on their birthdays. Her. Well, that's a very selfish attitude to instill in a child. My son always shares his birthday gifts at his parties. It teaches generosity. Her son was looking increasingly uncomfortable, shrinking behind her legs as she spoke. I felt terrible for the kid. Me. We encourage sharing daily, but today is special. He'll have plenty of time to share his toys during playdates. She rolled her eyes dramatically, but fell silent as my son continued opening gifts. Then came the big one, a present from us, saved for last. It was a ride-on toy car that he had been asking for since seeing it at a store months ago. It wasn't the fanciest model, but it was what we could afford, and we knew he'd love it. When he tore off the paper and saw what it was, his squeal of delight made all the saving and budgeting worth it. He immediately wanted to take it outside and try it, so my husband started helping him unbox it. That's when it happened. While we were distracted with a car, she walked over to the gift table, picked up the ride-on car box, and started heading toward the door. At first, I thought maybe she was moving it to make room or helping take it outside. But then her son called out. Her son? Mom, where are you going with that? The room fell silent as everyone turned to look. She was halfway to the front door, the large box awkwardly clutched in her arms. Her. This is too extravagant for one child. My son has been wanting one of these, and since you people obviously don't believe in sharing, we'll just take it home where it will be appreciated by all his friends too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this woman seriously trying to steal my son's birthday present? In front of a room full of witnesses? My husband, put that down right now. Her. Excuse me, don't you use that tone with me? This is exactly what's wrong with society, parents raising entitled brats who don't know how to share. My son started crying, confused and upset about why this lady was taking his new favorite toy. That broke something in me. Me. Put my son's gift down and leave our house immediately. Her? Or what? You'll throw more cheap streamers at me. That's when my husband pulled out his phone. My husband. I'm calling the police. You are attempting to steal from us in our home at our child's birthday party. She laughed like she thought he was bluffing. Her. Go ahead. I'd like to see you explain to the police how you're teaching greed to children. To everyone's shock, my husband actually dialed 911 and began explaining the situation. The other parents stood stunned, and some began gathering their children, moving them to another room to shield them from the unfolding drama. When she realized he was serious, her face changed. First shock, then anger, then a calculation I could almost see working behind her eyes. She set the box down roughly. Her. This is ridiculous. I was just making a point. Learn to take a joke. Me. A joke? You made my son cry and tried to steal his birthday present. What kind of person does that? Her. The kind who's trying to teach some manners to people who clearly need it. Come on, we're leaving. She grabbed her son's arm and headed for the door, but my husband stopped her. My husband. The police are already on their way. I think you should wait. Her. You can't keep me here. That's kidnapping. Other parent. Actually, they can ask you to wait if you've committed a crime, and we all witnessed you trying to steal that toy. She looked around the room, seemingly noticing for the first time that there were about a dozen adults who had seen everything. Her bravado deflated slightly, but she still tried to maintain her position. Her. This whole situation is absurd. I was making a philosophical point about sharing. To everyone's surprise, her son pulled away from her grip and walked back to the living room. With tears in his eyes, he looked at my still crying son. Her son. I'm sorry she tried to take your present. It's your birthday, not mine. I don't want your toy. The sincerity in this child's voice was heartbreaking. Here was a kid, probably no older than 5, showing more maturity than his grown mother. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, two officers, who looked mildly confused to be called to a children's birthday party. We explained the situation, and several other parents confirmed our account. The officers took her aside for questioning. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like petty theft and bad example. Her face grew increasingly red as they spoke to her. One officer came back to talk to us. "Officer, she claims it was a misunderstanding and that she was simply looking at the toy more closely. We've explained that multiple witnesses contradict this version of events." "My husband, are you arresting her?" "Officer, that's up to you. You could press charges for attempted theft. Or, given that nothing actually left the premises and there are children present, we could issue a warning and escort her from the property." We looked at the other parents, at the kids who were confused and upset, and at her son, who looked absolutely mortified. "Me? I don't want to press charges. I just want her to leave and never come back." The officer nodded and went back to speak with her. Meanwhile, her son approached us again. Her son, "I'm really sorry. Mom gets like this sometimes. She takes things that aren't hers and says it's because we deserve them." My heart broke for this child. What kind of example was she setting? The officers eventually escorted her toward the door, but before leaving, they insisted she apologize publicly. It was clearly the last thing she wanted to do. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. I never intended to take anything." Officer: "Ma'am, that's not what the witnesses reported. Let's try again with the truth." She gritted her teeth so hard I could practically hear them grinding. "Fine. I apologize for attempting to take the gift. It was inappropriate." Her son walked up to my boy and offered his hand. Her son: "I'm sorry about your party. Happy birthday." My son, resilient as only children can be, had already mostly recovered from the upset and shyly shook his hand. After they left, escorted by the police, the party slowly got back on track. The other parents were incredibly supportive, helping clean up and making sure my son still had a good time despite the interruption. Later, I learned from another parent that this wasn't the first time she'd pulled something like this. Apparently, she had a reputation at the local school for demanding special treatment and taking things that didn't belong to her. She'd been banned from volunteering after school supplies went missing during her shifts. It's been several months since the incident, and we've seen her son at the playground with his father, who has primary custody. The boy seems happier and more relaxed without his mother around. We've made a point to include him in playdates and smaller gatherings, but we're careful to make sure she isn't the one dropping him off. As for my son, he barely remembers the incident. He loves his ride-on car and zooms around our backyard every chance he gets. Sometimes I look at him playing so innocently and feel grateful that, despite that woman's best efforts, his special day wasn't completely ruined. And those cheap dollar store decorations? I saved them. They're in a box in our closet, ready for the next celebration, because sometimes the things that cost the least are worth fighting for the most. Story 2. I've been organizing the quarterly community bonfire at Clearwater Beach for about 3 years now. It all started when I was going through a rough patch after my divorce. I had just moved to this coastal town to start fresh, and I didn't know anyone. One evening, I was walking along the shore when I came across a group of people gathered around a small fire, laughing and sharing stories. They invited me to join, and for the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That group became my chosen family, and when the original organizer moved away, I volunteered to take over. Now, I handle all the permits, coordinate the food, and make sure we leave the beach cleaner than we found it. The local authorities know me by now, and they appreciate how responsible our group is. We never cause trouble, always follow the rules, and create a welcoming space for anyone who wants to join. Our bonfires have become somewhat famous in the area. What started as a small gathering of maybe 10 people has grown to include around 50 regular attendees, with newcomers joining each time. We hold them 4 times a year, coordinating with the town calendar to make sure we don't conflict with other events. The summer bonfire is always the most popular, bringing together locals and tourists alike. This particular evening was our summer solstice bonfire. I had spent weeks preparing, securing all the necessary permits, organizing a potluck, and even arranging for a local musician to play acoustic guitar. The weather forecast was perfect: clear skies, mild temperature, and just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away, but not enough to blow sand everywhere. I arrived at the beach 3 hours early to set up. Several friends showed up to help, and we got the main bonfire pit ready, along with 3 smaller fire pits spaced out according to regulations. By the time people started arriving at 7 p.m., everything was perfect. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the water, and the first fire was already crackling merrily. About an hour into the event, when most of our guests had arrived and the atmosphere was buzzing with conversation and laughter, I noticed a woman I'd never seen before marching across the sand. She looked to be in her 50s, with an expensive-looking sun hat and designer sandals that were clearly not meant for beach walking. Even from a distance, I could see the look of determination on her face. At first, I thought she might be someone's relative or a curious passerby interested in joining our gathering. We always welcome newcomers, but as she got closer, I realized she wasn't heading toward our welcome table laden with food and drinks. She was making a beeline for the main bonfire. Me: "Hi there. Are you here for the community bonfire? Help yourself to some food and—" Woman: "Are you in charge of this environmental hazard?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the pleasant chatter around us. Several conversations nearby died down as people turned to look. Me: "I'm the organizer." "Yes. Is there something I can help you with?" Woman: "You can help by putting out these fires immediately. The smoke is irritating my lungs, and I can smell it all the way from my rental property." She gestured vaguely toward a row of beachfront houses about a quarter-mile down the shore. I knew those properties well. They were vacation rentals that went for thousands per week during the summer season. Me: "I'm sorry you're bothered by the smoke, but we have all the proper permits for tonight's event. This is a designated bonfire area, and we've been planning this for months." I tried to keep my voice friendly and calm, even as I felt a knot forming in my stomach. In my 3 years of running these events, we'd never had a complaint like this. Woman: "I don't care about your permits. I have a right to clean air. Do you know how much I paid for my vacation? I did not spend all that money to breathe in your pollution." By this point, several of my friends had noticed the commotion and moved closer, forming a protective semicircle behind me. Friend 1: "Ma'am, these bonfires are a town tradition. They're only held 4 times a year, and tonight's event has been on the public calendar for months." Woman: "Don't ma'am me. This is a public beach, and I have every right to be here without having my health compromised. I have sensitive lungs." She pulled out her phone and waved it dramatically. Woman: "If you don't put these fires out right now, I'm calling the authorities." My friend who worked for the town's parks department stepped forward. Friend 2: "Actually, we already have the authorities' approval. Would you like to see the permits?" The woman glared at my friend with such intensity that I half expected him to burst into flames. Woman: "I don't need to see your so-called permits. What I need is for these fires to be extinguished immediately." At this point, I decided to try a different approach. Me: "I understand you're concerned about the smoke. We've actually set up the fires considering the wind direction to minimize smoke toward the houses. But if you'd like, we can guide you to the other side of the gathering where you'll be upwind and won't smell anything." Woman: "That's not acceptable. I want to enjoy the entire beach. Why should I have to compromise my vacation because of your little campfire club?" The way she spat out "campfire club" made it sound like we were engaging in some sort of illicit activity rather than a community-sanctioned event that brought together people of all ages and backgrounds. Friend 3: "Look, we're not shutting down an entire beach event because one person has a complaint. We have over 50 people here enjoying themselves. The woman looked around, seemingly noticing for the first time just how many people were gathered. Rather than backing down, however, she lifted her chin defiantly. "Woman, fine. If you won't be reasonable, I'll find someone who will." With that, she stomped away to the edge of our gathering, phone pressed to her ear. I could hear her voice, shrill with indignation, as she apparently called someone to complain. We tried to get back to enjoying the evening, but I couldn't help glancing over at her every few minutes. She was pacing back and forth, gesticulating wildly as she talked on her phone. After about 15 minutes, she put her phone away with a look of smug satisfaction that made my heart sink. "Friend 1, what do you think she's doing?" "Me, nothing good, I'm sure. But let's not let her ruin our night." We went back to our festivities, and I was just starting to relax again when I heard the distant wail of sirens. My first thought was that someone down the beach needed medical assistance. It happened occasionally, especially during tourist season. But as the sirens grew louder, I realized they were heading straight for us. 2 fire trucks pulled into the beach parking lot, lights flashing. 4 firefighters jumped out and began making their way across the sand toward our gathering. My heart pounded as I walked to meet them, permits in hand. "Me, good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" "Lead firefighter, we received a call about an unauthorized bonfire creating a hazardous situation." Before I could respond, the woman appeared at his elbow, pointing accusingly at our fires. "Woman, those are the ones. As I told you on the phone, they're creating a dangerous amount of smoke, and no one will do anything about it." The lead firefighter turned to look at her, and I was surprised to see a flash of recognition cross his face, followed by what looked suspiciously like annoyance. "Lead firefighter, ma'am, did you call the emergency line for this?" "Woman, of course I did. This is an emergency. These people are polluting public property and endangering the health of beachgoers." The firefighter sighed and turned back to me. "Lead firefighter, may I see your permit, please?" I handed over our paperwork, which he examined briefly before nodding. "Lead firefighter, everything appears to be in order. You're well within the designated bonfire area, and I can see you've kept the fires at the regulated size." "Woman, that can't be right. Look at all this smoke." The firefighter turned to her with a stern expression. "Lead firefighter, ma'am, this is the 3rd time this summer you've called in a false emergency. We've spoken about this before." The woman's face flushed red, but she didn't back down. "Woman, it's not false. I have respiratory issues, and they're deliberately." "Lead firefighter, the beach has designated bonfire areas specifically to allow for these community events while maintaining safety. The organizers have all the proper permits and are following all regulations. There is no emergency here." He turned to his colleagues and nodded. One of them pulled out what looked like a citation book. "Woman, what are you doing?" The second firefighter approached her, pen in hand. "Second firefighter, ma'am, we're issuing you a citation for misuse of emergency services. Calling 911 for a non-emergency ties up resources that could be needed for actual life-threatening situations." "Woman, you can't find me. I'm the one who called you for help." "Lead firefighter, that's exactly the problem, ma'am. This is your 3rd false report, and as we warned you the last time, continued abuse of emergency services results in a fine." The woman snatched the citation paper, her hand shaking with fury. "Woman, this is outrageous. I'll be speaking to your supervisor, and the mayor, and my lawyer." She continued ranting as the firefighters calmly explained the process for disputing the citation if she wished to do so. Finally, after threatening everyone from the fire chief to the governor, she stormed off toward the beachfront houses, citation crumpled in her fist. The lead firefighter turned back to me with an apologetic smile. "Lead firefighter, sorry about the interruption. You folks enjoy your evening. That's a nice setup you've got here." "Me, thank you. Would you and your team like to grab some food before you go? We've got plenty." The firefighters politely declined, explaining they needed to get back to the station, but they thanked us for the offer. As they headed back to their trucks, one of them called over his shoulder, Third firefighter, don't worry about her. She does this every summer, rents a fancy place, and then tries to act like she owns the whole beach. Last week she called us because someone was grilling hot dogs too close to her property line. After they left, our gathering quickly returned to its festive atmosphere. If anything, the encounter had brought our community closer together, with people sharing stories of other entitled tourists they'd encountered over the years. As I watched the main bonfire send sparks spiraling up toward the starlit sky, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this community that had welcomed me when I needed it most. No entitled tourist could take that away from us. Later that evening, as we were starting to pack up, I noticed a family tentatively approaching our gathering, a couple with 2 young children, all looking a bit shy and uncertain. Me, hi there, are you folks looking to join us? Father, actually, we're staying in one of the rental houses down the beach, and we saw your bonfire. The kids have never roasted marshmallows before, and we were wondering. I smiled and gestured toward our supplies. Me, we've got plenty of marshmallows, chocolate, and graham crackers. Come on over. As I helped the children assemble their first s'mores, I couldn't help but glance down the beach toward where our entitled visitor had disappeared. I hoped she could see from her expensive rental that the beach belonged to everyone, those who respected it, shared it, and came together to create memories around its bonfires. The family ended up staying until the very end, helping us clean up the beach. They promised to come back for our fall equinox bonfire, and I gave them my email to keep in touch. As I drove home that night, sandy and smelling of wood smoke, I couldn't help but smile. Some people might try to claim public spaces as their own private domain, but in our little beach community, entitlement never wins. Story 3. I never thought I'd be the one handling my aunt's funeral arrangements, but life has a funny way of putting you in unexpected situations. I work at the city's most reputable funeral home, where I've been a director for almost 8 years now. My job involves helping families navigate the difficult process of saying goodbye to their loved ones with dignity and respect. Last Tuesday started like any other day. I had just finished arranging flowers for an afternoon service when my colleague at the front desk called to let me know someone had arrived to discuss a new funeral arrangement. I straightened my tie, put on my professional smile, and headed to the consultation room. The woman waiting for me was scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I entered. I immediately noticed her designer purse and expensive jewelry that seemed at odds with the annoyed expression on her face, as if being here was a massive inconvenience. Me, good morning, I'm the funeral director. I understand you're here to make arrangements for your aunt? She glanced up from her phone with a look of impatience. Woman, finally. Yes, my aunt died yesterday. Heart attack or something. We weren't close, but apparently I'm the only one with time to handle this. The way she said time made it clear she considered this an unwelcome burden rather than a final act of care for a family member. I nodded sympathetically and pulled out our information packet. Me, I'm sorry for your loss. May I ask your aunt's name for our records? Woman, her name was Aunt. She was my mother's sister. Haven't seen her in years, but Mom's too upset to deal with this, so here I am. I made a note in our system and began explaining our services. When I showed her our pricing sheet, her eyes widened dramatically. Woman, are you kidding me? $8,000 for a basic casket? That's highway robbery. Me, I understand these costs can be surprising. Unfortunately, funeral services do involve significant expenses. We do our best to. Woman, no. Look, I'm dealing with a bereavement here. Surely you offer some kind of bereavement discount? I maintained my professional composure, though this was far from the first time I'd heard this request. Me, I'm afraid our prices are fixed, but we do offer payment plans if that would be helpful. She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a conspiracy theory. Woman, listen, between you and me, she's not going to be using the casket for very long, is she? Just a few hours for the viewing, then it goes in the ground. Why should we pay full price for something that's barely used? I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. In my years of service, I'd encountered many difficult clients, but there was something particularly unsettling about people who tried to cut corners on a loved one's final arrangements. Ma'am, our prices reflect the craftsmanship and materials involved, not the duration of use. We take pride in providing dignified services for families during difficult times. Woman, fine, whatever. But my aunt had a prepaid funeral plan, right? I saw it in her papers. This was news to me. I checked our system and confirmed that her aunt had indeed purchased a comprehensive package 3 years ago, which included a high-quality mahogany casket. Yes, it seems your aunt made arrangements with us previously. She selected our premier package, which includes the Eternal Rest mahogany casket. Everything is paid in full. Instead of looking relieved, the woman seemed disappointed. Then her expression changed to one of calculation. Woman, so what if we downgrade to a cheaper casket? Can I get the difference refunded to me? I'm handling all the arrangements, after all. The request sent alarm bells ringing. This was not just inappropriate, but potentially fraudulent. I'm afraid that's not possible. Your aunt specifically selected and paid for these arrangements. Any changes would need to be appropriate substitutions of equal value, and any potential refunds would go to her estate, not to an individual family member. Woman, that's ridiculous. I'm doing all the work here. Nobody would even know the difference if we used a cheaper casket. I would know, ma'am, and I believe your family would care that their loved one's wishes were respected. She huffed and stood up. Woman, I need to use the restroom. I'll be right back. Something about her demeanor made me suspicious. Instead of returning to my office, I quietly walked toward our showroom. Sure enough, there she was, taking photos of our least expensive caskets and making notes on her phone. When she saw me, she quickly pretended to be just browsing. Woman, I was just looking at options. That maple one is nice. Ma'am, were you planning to switch your aunt's casket without informing the rest of your family? Woman, of course not. I'm just comparing for future reference. I apologize, but I don't believe that's the case. You were very clear about wanting to pocket the difference from downgrading your aunt's arrangements. I cannot in good conscience allow you to proceed with altering her prepaid plan in this manner. Her face flushed red with anger. Woman, how dare you accuse me of anything? Do you know who I am? My family has connections in this city. I'm not accusing you of anything beyond what I've directly observed and what you've stated yourself. However, I will need to contact the executor of your aunt's estate to discuss these arrangements further. Woman, this is outrageous. I'm trying to be practical here. There's nothing practical about attempting to profit from your aunt's funeral arrangements. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I escorted her to the door while she continued to protest loudly. Afterward, I immediately called her aunt's lawyer, who was listed as the executor in our records. He was appalled and thanked me for my integrity. He then contacted the rest of the family. Later that afternoon, I received a call from the woman's mother, the sister of the deceased. She was mortified by her daughter's behavior and asked if I would still handle the funeral despite the unpleasant encounter. I assured her that we would honor her sister's wishes exactly as she had planned them. The funeral took place 3 days later. The service was beautiful, with the elegant mahogany casket that the aunt had chosen herself. Many family members approached me afterward to thank me for my handling of the situation. The woman who had tried to swap the casket was notably absent. Her family had collectively decided she should not attend. Sometimes in my line of work, you see people at their worst. Grief can bring out strange behaviors, but there's a clear line between cutting corners due to financial concerns and trying to profit from someone's death. I'm just glad I was able to ensure this woman's aunt received the dignified farewell she had planned and paid for herself.